war in the Middle East is escalating fast. On the third day of joint U.S. and Israeli strikes against Iran, President Donald Trump declared America is knocking the stuffing out of them and warned that the big wave of attacks is still to come. Now, as Hezbollah joins the fight and U.S. casualties mount, Trump insists that the conflict will last about a month, but promises the hardest blows are yet ahead. The recent news of the strikes and the confirmed death of Ayatollah Khamenei has completely upended the Middle East. Now, on Beyond the Continent today, we ask, what now? About how the region's delicate balance of power has just been shattered and the vacuum, that's the power vacuum and internal stability, is what we will be looking at on Beyond the Continent. To speak more on this, we're joined by Dr. Samuel Oyewole, Research Fellow, African Center for the Study of the United States, University of Pretoria in South Africa. We also have Obi Naijanya, African Affairs Analyst in Melbourne, Australia. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us at this time.
Thank you for inviting us. It's good to participate again.
It's a pleasure to have you back, Obina. So let me begin with you. Now, we've seen the state machinery in Tehran, quickly signal continuity. But speak to us realistically. How does the system built so heavily on one man's personal authority handle a decapitation of this scale without a messy internal power struggle?
As we know that the Islamic Revolutionary Movement of Iran has existed for nearly 5 decades. So it's a movement or organization that has strong foundation and strong structure. So what we're seeing is an outcome of people that are well prepared for anything that comes their way.
All right, now let's see. Let me pass this question to Dr. Oyewole. Dr. Oyewole, if you can hear me, can you please say something?
I can hear you.
All right, thank you for joining us. All right. Now, with the IRGC now effectively in the driving seat, are we likely to see a more pragmatic military leadership emerge? I'm speaking of in Iran, because we're talking about the regional impact right now. Or will the old guard feel that they have to double down on aggression just to prove that they have not been weakened?
I think there are 2 possibilities in this context. The first one is the possibility, is the ongoing process. Immediately after the death of Ali Khamenei, Article 111 of the Iranian constitution was activated to establish Provisional Leadership Council made up of the president, the head of judiciary, and a member of a guardian council. But in addition to that, we can observe the strength of IRGC in this context, especially given it years of invested capacity and interest in the politics and the internal security of Iran. So there is a tendency for this particular development to push for a growing trend that is increasing the influence of the military in politics, because since the 1979 revolution in Iran, the military has been reduced to border guard, while the IRGC, that's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, have been elevated to play a major role in the internal security as well as the political arrangement of the system. But the complexity of this arrangement involves a lot of layers that has been designed to protect the authority of the supreme leader, which is the Ali Khamenei. So in this context, there is a tendency for the military interest as well as influence on politics to increase, given the number of top leaders that have been decapitated, put at the side of the IRGC as well as the military. Thank you.
All right, now let's come back to Obinna. Obinna, you've heard what Dr. Oyewole has said, and we know that the Gulf states have actually spent years trying to de-escalate with Iran. So now that, you know, their own territory has been caught in the crossfire because we're seeing strikes in the UAE, Kuwait, and, you know, some other places, is that policy of neutrality officially over? Is it officially dead?
We can see the handwriting on the wall that there's no way the Gulf region will play, their neutrality won't succeed this time, because the escalation and the economic implications is becoming devastating. As you can see, what UAE is losing, and now an oil refinery energy center has been bombed in Saudi Arabia. So it involves a lot of economic implications. So that won't be swept under the carpet. So we are going to see a Gulf region that will, you know, rise up in full weight against Iran.
All right, let's hear from you as well, Dr. Oyewole. Let's have your thoughts on this, you know, and also what does this do to the Abraham Accords and the normalization of ties with Israel? Do you think that the Arab leaders realistically can continue those partnerships while their own populations watch Tehran in flames, even though some of them, you know, are actually in flames at the moment?
Yeah, I think in time of relationship between in time of the question of neutrality, I think most Gulf states, Arab countries generally still try to maintain neutrality in this context. Although they are moving from core neutrality to defensive neutrality, in the sense that countries like UAE has already closed its embassy in Tehran, as well as summoned the ambassador of Iran in the country to explain the situation. Most Arab countries have condemned, the Gulf state and other Arab countries have condemned the indiscriminate attack of the affected Gulf state by Iran. However, in this context, these countries still try to maintain the balance by avoiding denying their airspace to the U.S. military to use for offensive purpose against Iran. This shows that these countries are trying to maintain delicate balance between their support or alliance with the U.S. as well as a pragmatic relation with the Arab country. And again, in terms of relationship with Israel, none of these countries have declared that a member of the Abraham Accord has shown interest to withdraw from this particular accord, showing that this been actually have limited effect on the Abraham Accord. Saudi Arabia is not a member of the Abraham Accord. Signing that particular accord has been conditioned on settling the Palestinian crisis. However, there's a tendency for this particular crisis to bring Israel closer to the Arab countries in terms of security arrangement. Because in these countries, we have seen Israel sharing intelligence and assets with some of these Arab countries to prepare and to defend against the current wave of Iranian attack. So this particular dynamics may actually affect the overall regional security architecture of the country, allowing Israel to integrate more with the region, while a bit annihilation of Iran, why, even though this country tries to maintain pragmatic engagement with Iran.
All right. Now, Obinna earlier talked about how, you know, this is actually affecting oil prices, and we're seeing massive disruption in global shipping and aviation, with the Strait of Hormuz effectively a no-go zone. So this is still for you, Dr. Oyewole. If this turns into a prolonged blockade, how long can the global economy actually absorb this before we see a real crisis at the pumps?
Okay, I think currently for the first 1 or 2 days, the global economy has tried to absorb the shock. Although the price of oil, I think, has passed $82 per barrel. But if this continue for a week to 3 weeks, I think there's a projection that it may surpass 100 and enter 120. And if this prolonged further, and there's maybe further attack on refinery, pipeline, and the rest, we may see global oil price skyrocketing up to 150 or 200 in the worst case scenario. That's the prediction. So in time of there is alternative pipeline through Saudi Arabia, but this is not enough to actually absorb the shock of closing down the Strait of Hormuz. Almost. However, the U.S. military has been trying to neutralize the Iranian capability, naval capability, to blockade or to disrupt shipping in this route. So there's still much to see in the next coming days on how this play out. Although, as we can see with the aviation sector that has been effectively closed in many countries like UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, due to the threat. We still have a lot to see in terms of how Iran can sustain can maintain its capability in the face of constant attack, as well as how it can project this power to defend his interest or obstruct shipping route or blockade the route, the strait entirely.
All right, now coming to you, Obinna. Obinna, the U.S. and Israel are framing this as a necessity. They're framing it as a preemptive necessity. But the ICJ is already raising red flags about sovereignty. What do you think? Does this essentially rewrite the rule book on regime change for the 21st century?
Yeah, what's playing out is a strategic attack on Iran to change the status quo. USA, like we see the Defense Secretary of USA speaking today, saying that they are not in particular interested in a regime change in Iran, but that is just rhetorical. But the reality is that there must be a regime change in Iran. And Iran has this long-lasting history of fueling terrorism around the world. So, and it has to come to an end. And that is what USA, under the leadership of Donald Trump and Israel, of course, is trying to achieve. They want to see that someone who is not an extremist is in power, a moderate Muslim leader in Iran. That's what they want to achieve. And Iran and Saudi Arabia they have a long-standing rivalry. And this is one of the reasons why Saudi Arabia has continued to be in alliance with the USA and, of course, Israel. Because enemy to my enemy eventually can be a better friendship, in a better friendship with me. So that is what is going on. So what we are seeing now is an Iran that will have a change of leadership. That's what I forecast.
Okay. Now, coming back to Doctor, there's a dangerous historical precedent here. Removing a dictator doesn't always remove the problem. We all know that. Would you think that we're looking at a Libya scenario on a much vaster and a more dangerous scale? All right, let's hear if you can answer the let's hear you answer the question, Obinna.
Yeah, of course, when this Islamic revolution movement in Iran is toppled, there will be a serious kind of power vacuum and power tussle, you know. So that will create a lot of insecurity within the region and around the world. But we can't, because of that, say that we should leave Iran to continue to be a threat to global peace. So I think what is happening now, for me, is necessary. It's been too long when this issue of Iran controversies, it has lasted too long, and it needs to be fixed. As you can see, there was a kind of protest in Iran where majority of Iranians were protesting that they don't want these religious leaders to be in power. So the order of the day, the dynamics that's playing out around the world is not that which people try to force religious ideology on other people. So that era does not hold water anywhere else in the world. So why should they target, as you know, Sharia law is the law that is being put in place, that's being enforced in Iran. And Iran has different kind of people of religious backgrounds, of different religious backgrounds. So why enforcing a religion on them? So I think it's a justifiable adventure.
All right, just to add to your question, there are also other questions that, people are asking, like if the goal was to empower the Iranian people to take back their country, as President Trump suggested, then what happens if the result is not a democratic uprising, but a full-scale civil war or a military junta? And how do the U.S. and Israel prevent this from happening or becoming a forever war in the heart of the Middle East, especially if Iran's regional proxies decide to launch their own independent retaliations, which we are actually seeing a few of now? And then where do Russia and China sit in all of this? Because they've been uncharacteristically quiet so far. So if there's a point where they feel that they have to intervene to protect their own interests in the region, then when will that be? These are some of the questions that are being asked. But thank you so much, Dr. Oyewole, for joining us. That's Dr. Samuel Oyewole for joining us. And also, Obinna, thank you once again. You're still watching The Conversation. Thank you for staying. Now, the death of Ayatollah Khamenei and the ensuing military chaos in the Gulf are not just Middle Eastern problems. Because from the ports of Mombasa to the oil fields in the Niger Delta, the continent is bracing for a fallout that could redefine its economic and political future. With the Suez Canal effectively a dead zone and Red Sea insurance premiums, up to 400%, East African trade is also being strangled by hyperinflation. And politically, the decapitation of Iran's leadership has fractured BRICS plus unity and left a security vacuum in conflict zones like Sudan, where Iranian drone diplomacy was a key factor. So ultimately, the removal of a leader in Tehran has not solved the problem in Africa. It has, in fact, triggered a ripple effect of economic pain and diplomatic distrust that the continent was ill-prepared to handle. Now, to unpack this, I'm joined by Levi Mboushou, Global Affairs Analyst, and also Phumlani Majozi, Senior Economist, African Markets Institute, Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us at this time, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you. The pleasure is ours.
It's a pleasure. So let me begin with Phumlani. Phumlani, the price of Brent crude has just surged past $135 a barrel. While this provides a massive windfall for exporters in the likes of Nigeria and Angola, how do oil-poor nations like Kenya or Senegal survive the resulting import cost inflation without, seeing bread riots in their streets?
Well, it's going to be really tough for oil importing nations because it basically means that, the cost of living is being lifted upwards. We saw the oil price shooting up today by more than 8%. It's about $79 a barrel right now. And that's really negative for oil importing countries. Now, that's the cost of living, which basically means inflation will be impacted and is going to be on the upward trend. And the result of that will be, the central bankers in these countries, they will need to adjust their interest rate decision making. Here in South Africa, there's been much talk about our central bank being in the cutting cycle. It's been cutting interest rates, and the expectations this year were that we will see our central bank continuing to cut the interest rates. And right now, people are saying, look, so long as we have this conflict that is affecting oil supply in the global market and the oil price shooting up, well, we shouldn't expect our central bank to cut the rates at the end of this month, and therefore they are going to hold on as the global risks increase. So the cost of living an increasing cost of living, increasing inflation will be what affects oil importing nations in Africa, and that will be negative.
All right, so let's hear from Levi as well. Let's have your thoughts, especially with the Suez Canal, effectively a dead zone. How catastrophic is the delay for East African trade? And also, do you think that the Cape route around South Africa, can actually handle this sudden massive diversion, of traffic?
Now, I'd say that even if the Horn of Africa were to come up momentarily with some kind of solution, that will not last, given the fact that these external shocks would have a kind of ripple effect, not only in Eastern Africa, but going from up the Suez Canal to other trade routes, the one that comes from Yemen on the apex there around Djibouti, all of these routes that would have been expected to stomach the pain that we see from the collapse of the Ayatollah up in Iran would not in any way stem the tide of what's happening across from up in the Middle East and then rippling its way from up Africa, in the Maghreb, down to West and Central Africa, up down to the Horn of Africa. In the long run, like my co-panelist said, it would have to have a strong impact on the common man on the street, on the households that need all of these commodities to survive, the very institutions that drive our day-to-day living, needing so badly these resources and these commodities coming from the economic downturn, which would in course be affected. We've started hearing rumors of increase in inflation, and this is not going to just come by the direct impact. There are huge indirect impacts that will come from these. We don't expect the dollar to stay the way it is. Already there were growing concerns about America's policy abroad, at home and abroad, affecting the collapse of the dollar. And we've been seeing the continuing decline of the dollar against major currencies across the globe. And not only did we have other external shocks affecting these, but these, with the spate of conflict spreading across all over the Middle East, it would have a strong impact on these trade routes. And I bet you that the fear is that Africa is to brace herself for the worst. Because if the trend goes the way it is, and we see other parties inviting themselves to the conflict, looks like they were on standby and they just needed America and Israel to give the go. France, UK, and European allies are already gearing up to take the baton and then carry on with what's happening. So these trade routes will be severely affected, and then Africa should tighten their seatbelts. We would have to discuss later on what this would mean for diplomatic relations between Africa, African institutions, and the greater part of the Greater West, as we call them. So yes, Africa is set to take a huge toll on these.
Okay, so let's come back to you, Phumlani. you know, analysts actually suggests that the global risk-off sentiment is causing investors, you know, to pull capital out of the emerging markets, you know, especially with many African nations already struggling with debt distress. Does the collapse of the Iranian status quo effectively pull the rug out from under the carpet, you know, especially for Africa's debt restructuring efforts?
Yeah, well, Africa has had for a long time has had issues with, you know, with it's been seen by investors as a high risk continent. And at this point, given the challenges that are being faced right now, and by the way, we should be clear here that we don't know when this is going to dissipate, right? When this is going to calm down. In fact, analysts, you know, they project that the oil price will be around $8 for the next foreseeable sort of term, right, in the next weeks, because it's not clear when this is going to dissipate. And we should also be aware that what is happening now is that the energy infrastructure in the Gulf is being attacked, right, by Iran, and that is already, you know, causing supply issues from nations like Qatar that are supplying oil and others, obviously. So, and we are not sure when this is going to happen. And given the already severe economic challenges that Africans face, this is going to be problematic. In other words, the African nations will continue to have very much, you know, challenging economic conditions that will make it very difficult for them to access capital in the global market. And that's goes basically adding to an environment that is already tough for Africa, as it is not seen as it is seen as a continent that is very much, you know, that has a high risk when it comes to by investors. So it's really it is a big problem that unfortunately, at least for now, at least this geopolitical issue happening in the Middle East, our leaders in Africa have very little control of. That is the unfortunate thing for our leaders. It's something that they will need to watch and see in which direction it goes.
Okay, coming back to you, Levi, Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia are all now, you know, members of BRICS Plus. Now, with one member state's leadership decapitated, how does this affect the internal unity of the bloc? Are we seeing the end of the global South as a cohesive political alternative to the West?
In a way, I'd even go beyond that and say that this seems to have been a calculated maneuver to destabilize this bloc. We all know how jittery the West, the global West, or if you like to put it the way, the bigger bloc of the Western hegemony with all of their soft power, not wanting to see a growing rival. And they would stop at nothing to come up with machinations. Sometimes they could be very diabolical, and they would want to go to any extent to see that they don't let any emerging power stand to take the wind out of their sails. So with what's happening in Iran, it goes without saying that this would kind of topple or put in place some kind of disequilibrium in the already strong force we're beginning to see in this BRICS Plus arrangement. Now, with all of these, and mind you that it's not just Iran, it's impacting all of these people, Egypt and Ethiopia. What would that mean for the geopolitics around this area, not just in the Middle East, but in parts of NAME, North Africa, and the Middle East, broader region? Of course, we expect that this destabilization should be forcefully exported into these people or imported into these regions. And I would say that it would kind of put a smile, so to speak, it would put a geopolitical smile on the faces of these superpowers who would never have loved to see an emerging economically, politically, geopolitically, I should add, independent kind of arrangement, which would have meant bad business for them. So yes, there'd be some in-house destabilization of this emerging force that was already beginning to rise as a strategic geopolitical force to outsmart the superpowers. So there'll be some trouble in the house, if you may.
All right, speaking of trouble in the house, Phumlani, South Africa has been a vocal critic of Israeli military policy at the ICJ. And in light of this direct regime change strike, does Pretoria now find itself in a position where it must lead a continental diplomatic divorce from Washington and Tel Aviv?
Well, for South Africa, it's been a situation that has been in play for a long while, right? The US-South Africa tension didn't begin with Mr. Trump. It dates back to the pre-Trump era, right? So there were always tensions between South Africa and the US, as the US saw that South Africa was leaning more toward the likes of Russia, China, Iran as well. That has been a concern for the US for a long time. And South Africa right now, on its own, it is in there are tensions between the US and South Africa. So I doubt that Pretoria would risk to escalate those tensions already taking place between South Africa and the US. So right now, South Africa is being very cautious at how it is, positioning itself in global politics, because it is really in a situation where there are serious tensions between the US and South Africa. And some have predicted that at some point, the Trump administration could impose sanctions on South Africa. So there are negotiations going on between South Africa's government and the Trump administration. Where those negotiations are, it isn't quite clear, but it's very easy to see from afar that the situation is getting worse. And therefore, for South Africa right now, it wouldn't be a good position to mobilize that, Africa against Washington, D.C., or to try and sever the relations further than what they are right now. It wouldn't help South Africa at this point. It would put the situation would get worse between South Africa and the US.
Okay. Now, quickly, let's have your final thought, Levi, especially, we know that the African Union has long preached non-interference. So how should the AU respond to what many African leaders are calling a clear violation of sovereignty by the US and Israel? And does this, move push Africa even further into the arms of China? Also looking at it, there's a quote circulating from the AU Commission, and I quote, "The rules-based order is now a menu, not a law." So is the West's moral authority in Africa permanently damaged by this operation?
We all know the subservience of Africa, I would say of African leaders to the West, to Western power, to Western hegemony. And you said something very important here. Would this further push Africa away from the West into the hands of waiting China or waiting Russia? But the question is this, of what use would it serve Africa to change slave masters? Of what use? That's the fundamental question we ask. In the beginning, the same way these people are coming to court us, to court Africa and African leaders and African institutions today, this was the same way the Westerners came in the guise of colonization and trying to develop Africa. It's the same way Russia and China, they come today. They sit quiet. It's a deliberate act that they almost seem to be apparently neutral in this conflict. But they are sending a message to African leaders. And African leaders, with its plethora of sit-tight dictators, with their facades of democracy, will be asking themselves if the West could want to oust regimes as strong and as repressive as Iran, who would be the next? Does it mean that with a flip of the finger, America and Israel, or whichever superpower might want to do what they did in Gaddafi's Libya to Africa? So they are on the edge. I think my co-panelist did say something about South Africa not wanting to step on America's toes at this extremely critical moment. So it's becoming an open secret by the day that Africa, the AU institutions, these are talking shops where people go not to actually represent the interests of the African continent, but to lobby for support and for fundings from these same institutions we seem to criticize today so that they stay in power. So my take on this is that the AU, with its plethora of hand clappers, would not have a say. Would apparently come in and then make statements, but we all know that these would be smoke screens at the end of the day. So each and every one of those representatives at the AU will be trying to keep their own backyard clean so that they don't fall out with America, Israel, or the bigger West. That's my take.
All right, Levi. Now let's hear your final thoughts as well, Phumlani, in like 1 minute. Could this crisis actually force a green leap in Africa? Especially, I mean, if oil remains at $130, do we see a massive pivot towards the continent's solar or hydro potential?
Well, I mean, every crisis presents new opportunities, that old line.
Yeah.
There will be many opportunities to invest, to grow, to innovate, to innovate in energy, to expand our energy markets, as small as they are in Africa. Many opportunities are going to come through. And I think they are there. I've always said that Africa, really, this is a continent it's an opportunity, right? We are really the youngest continent in the world. We have mineral resources. Our challenges are around governance, that we need to address the issues of governance and to attract investment and so on. And so, there are many opportunities for Africa. So that possibility it is there. And we shall see in which direction this goes. But things like this, really, they remind us that we need to find innovative ways to reform, our sectors and ensure that these international crises, like this one we are seeing in the Middle East, they have a minimal impact in our domestic economies in the continent.
Okay. Well, that was a very, very, very interesting and in-depth conversation. But we would like to thank our guests, Levi Mboushou and Phumlani Majozi, for joining and speaking so passionately on this. Thank you so much, gentlemen.